Part 1. The land before the city. Long before Berlin became the sprawling capital of Germany, the land where it now stands was nothing more than a vast wilderness. Imagine thick forests stretching as far as the eye could see, rivers glistening under the sun, and marshes whispering with the sounds of hidden creatures. This land, rich with wildlife and water, was both a blessing and a challenge for early settlers. The mighty River Spree cut through the area, providing fish and transport, but also creating swampy ground that was difficult to build upon. Yet, as history often shows, it is in the most unlikely of places that great cities are born. Around the early Middle Ages, Slavic tribes began to move into this region. They built wooden huts along the riverbanks, relying on hunting, farming, and fishing for survival. Their settlements were small, fragile outposts in a land that still belonged more to nature than to people. The air was filled with the crackle of firewood, the chants of rituals, and the steady rhythm of oars moving through the Spree. These tribes named their places with words drawn from their own language, some of which echo faintly even today in Berlin's neighborhoods. Over time, merchants began to notice the strategic value of the area. The rivers made it a crossroads for trade, a place where goods could be exchanged between northern and southern Europe. The land that seemed unwelcoming at first slowly revealed its hidden potential. What began as scattered villages would soon transform into fortified towns. The seeds of Berlin were being planted, not by kings or empires at first, but by ordinary people seeking survival, opportunity, and connection. Little did they know, they were shaping the foundations of a city that would one day influence the whole world. Part 2. The birth of a settlement. By the 12th century, the wilderness along the River Spree was no longer untouched. Germanic settlers, merchants, and craftsmen were moving eastward, drawn by promises of land and opportunity. This movement, known in history as the Ostsiedlung, or eastward expansion, brought new energy into the region. The meeting of Slavic traditions with German settlers created a cultural blend that would mark Berlin's earliest character. The once isolated huts began to form larger communities, villages that hummed with trade and activity. It was during this time that two settlements emerged on opposite banks of the Spree, Berlin on one side and Cölln on the other. Imagine the scene: wooden bridges connecting the two, boats docking along the riverfront, and markets bustling with traders offering salt, furs, and grain. Life was modest, yet full of promise. The names themselves tell a story. Berlin, possibly rooted in the old Slavic word burl, meaning swamp, while Cölln echoed the Latin colonia, meaning settlement. Side by side, these two towns began to thrive, leaning on each other for strength. Over time, Cölln became the home of fishermen and boatmen, while Berlin grew into a hub for merchants and craftsmen. They were like siblings, different in spirit, yet inseparably linked. Their wooden houses lined narrow streets, their churches rising as symbols of hope and faith. As more travelers and traders passed through, the settlements grew in reputation. What had begun as a frontier outpost was turning into a recognized town, a place that lords and bishops could no longer ignore. Thus, by the end of the 12th century, Berlin and Cölln stood not merely as villages in the wilderness, but as young, ambitious towns. Their destiny was slowly unfolding, step by step, brick by brick, on the marshy banks of the Spree. Part 3. Unity and Power. As the 13th and 14th centuries unfolded, Berlin and Cölln grew closer, both physically and politically. Their wooden bridge across the River Spree was no longer just a crossing. It was the lifeline of trade, carrying merchants, goods, and stories from distant lands. The two towns began to act less like rivals and more like partners. They shared defenses, market rights, and eventually a common council. It was as if the river that divided them was slowly weaving them into one. By 1307, Berlin and Cölln officially joined under a single administration. Together, they formed a stronger voice in the region, attracting more merchants, craftsmen, and settlers. Stone walls were raised to protect against raids, and guilds organized the life of trade and craft. The sound of hammers, saws, and bells echoed through the streets as prosperity grew. The small settlements of wood and straw were transforming into a sturdy medieval town of stone, faith, and commerce. But with unity came responsibility. The city had to navigate the complex politics of the Holy Roman Empire and the powerful margraves of Brandenburg, who sought to control the fertile lands and thriving trade routes. Berlin became a pawn in greater struggles, yet also a prize too valuable to be ignored. It was taxed, commanded, and sometimes punished by rulers who recognized its growing importance. Still, the people of Berlin endured. Farmers, merchants, priests, and craftsmen worked side by side to build a city that could withstand both enemies and time. They did not yet know it, but they were laying the foundation of a capital that would one day shape the destiny of a nation. What had started as two humble towns was now a unified force, a city on the rise. Part 4. Trials of Fire and Faith. The late Middle Ages and early Renaissance were not easy years for Berlin. Prosperity attracted both opportunity and danger, and the city soon found itself caught in the storms of history. Fires, wars, and plagues swept through its narrow streets, testing the resilience of its people. Yet each time, Berlin rose again, rebuilt with determination and faith. The city's rulers, the margraves, and later the electors of Brandenburg left their mark. Castles and churches were erected as symbols of both power and devotion. St. Nicholas Church and St. Mary's Church stood tall, their spires pointing heavenward, guiding souls in times of darkness. Markets continued to flourish under the protection of city walls, while guilds ensured that craftsmanship and trade remained at the heart of Berlin's identity. But faith also brought conflict. With the Protestant Reformation in the 16th century, Berlin was swept into a wave of religious change. The teachings of Martin Luther echoed through its churches, challenging the old order. Monasteries were dissolved, and the electors of Brandenburg adopted Protestantism, forever altering the city's spiritual landscape. This shift divided communities, but also gave Berlin a renewed sense of direction. Amid these transformations, Berlin's political role deepened. As the seat of the Hohenzollern dynasty, it became more than just a trading town. It was a center of governance. The rulers envisioned a city that could reflect their ambitions, both militarily and culturally. Yet, at its heart, Berlin remained a city of ordinary people, boatmen guiding vessels on the Spree, craftsmen shaping stone and wood, and merchants counting coins beneath flickering lanterns. Through fire, plague, and faith, Berlin endured. The trials it faced forged a resilience that would become part of its identity, preparing the city for the even greater transformations that lay ahead. Part 5. From town to capital. By the dawn of the 17th century, Berlin had grown far beyond its humble beginnings. No longer just a river town of fishermen and merchants, it had become the proud residence of the electors of Brandenburg. The Hohenzollern dynasty, with their ambition and vision, began to transform Berlin into the beating heart of their realm. Palaces rose above the skyline, streets widened, and fortifications strengthened, signaling the city's new role as a seat of power. The 30 Years' War, however, brought devastation. Armies marched through its gates, plague returned with fury, and the population dwindled. Yet, true to its spirit, Berlin endured. When peace finally came, the city rebuilt with vigor. Immigrants from across Europe were welcomed French Huguenots fleeing persecution, skilled artisans from the Low Countries, and others who brought fresh crafts, knowledge, and ideas. Berlin became not only larger, but richer in culture and diversity. In the 18th century, under Frederick William, the Great Elector, and his successors, Berlin began to shine as more than a provincial town. It grew into a recognized center of administration, learning, and the arts. Universities, theaters, and academies were established, nurturing a spirit of intellectual curiosity. Baroque buildings lined its streets, and the city's identity evolved from medieval town to early modern capital. Looking back, the story of Berlin is one of transformation and endurance. From swamps and forests to bustling markets, from fire and plague to palaces and academies, the city rose again and again. The foundations laid by tribes, settlers, merchants, and rulers created more than just a city. They created a symbol of resilience. Berlin's true destiny, to become one of Europe's great capitals, was only just beginning.